On June 22nd, 2022, two men went for a dad's day out and ended up losing their lives. I'm Brandy from Stories, and this is the Buford Springs tragedy. The Buford Springs sinkhole is located in Chassahowitzka National Wildlife Refuge on the west coast of Florida, about 70 miles north of St. Petersburg. It is famous as the southern wintering site for the reintroduced eastern population of whooping cranes. The site is only 6 miles north and about a 20 minutes drive from Eagle's Nest Cave, one of the most famous cave diving sites in the world. The cave consists both of fresh and salt water and varies in color throughout the year. The water can range from completely clear to very poor visibility. Tannins are produced by the process of decaying leaves and make for a yellow or brownish tinted water. In addition to this, algal blooms sometimes take over the cave, hazing everything with green. These blooms occur when the nitrogen content of the water gets too low, so this can even happen in the winter. To get to the site itself, visitors used to have to climb through marsh mud and swamp land, which often had alligators and snakes climbing around in it. But in 2019, the park put in a walkway due to all of the divers getting lost, as well as to help with environmental protection. Buford Springs Cavern goes down to approximately 170 feet and has two main entrances. The first is the main one that everyone uses and is the large open area. And then the second is right near the main entrance, and it's two holes cut out of the cavern that you can leave out of. It should only be explored at the lower levels if technical diving certifications have been completed. And that leads us to our tale. At approximately 11 a.m., June 22nd, 2022, Todd McKenna and Stephen Gambrell, both longtime divers, arrived at Buford Springs Cavern. They spent a few minutes preparing for their dive and chatting with three juveniles who had come to the park to swim and hang out by the water. They then entered the water and began their dive, but a few minutes later, they resurfaced. The teens overheard their conversation, and that it was in regards to possibly going back down into the cave and whether or not they had enough air in their tanks to complete the dive. It is also believed that one of the divers mentioned that he possibly had a leak in his tank. After a short time, both adults dove back down under the water. A short while later, the teens observed one of the divers come up to the surface. The diver was floating face down, which the teens believed he was doing purposely to look for the other diver who had yet to surface. Before long, the teens noticed there were no bubbles coming to the surface like there had been earlier. They swam over to check on him and received no response. They were able to get the diver over to the dock, but were unable to lift him out of the water. It is now 12:20 p.m., and one of the teens makes the 911 call. When the two deputies arrived, they jumped into the water and together lifted the diver onto the dock. He was obviously deceased. Deputies waited for the other diver to come to the surface, knowing that he would soon run out of air. But as time passed and the second diver did not surface, it was surmised that he encountered some sort of problem in the cave. Several members of the IUCRR responded to the scene to attempt a recovery mission for the second diver. These highly specialized cave divers entered the water and began the search for the second diver. They located him approximately 137 feet below the surface. Obviously deceased, the diver was recovered and brought to the surface. Neither of the divers had any obvious signs of trauma, and both appeared to have the appropriate diving equipment. So what could have gone wrong? In almost every fatal scuba accident, we lack significant data, since the people who were a part of it are no longer around to tell their tale. So we try to reverse engineer what we can to determine the likely causes. From there, we can sometimes learn something about diving safer or confirm and remind ourselves of lessons that are already well known in the community. In my opinion, given the facts stated by the Sheriff's Office, nitrogen narcosis, possibly in tandem with hypocapnia, was the most likely cause. The scenario I think that happened was that Todd McKenna and Stephen Gambrell started their descent to Buford Springs, likely reaching the rock pile at about 50 to 70 feet, where there is a lot of stuff to interact with. During this time, Gambrell might have experienced some issues with his regulator and the connections to it. I've had a regulator leak on me before when I tried surface applied diving. I was hooked up to an unlimited oxygen supply tank with a snuba and swim around on the surface, so you don't have to do any training or anything towards diving. And my experience when I had a really bad leaky regulator was that the only way I could breathe when it was like that, because they fixed it 3 or 4 times, and the only way to breathe really was to take these deep breaths, these deep shallow breaths, so that I wouldn't suck in water from all the pressure. And in my opinion, I think that might have happened to Stephen, because he was the second one found down in the cave. So after experiencing this leaky regulator a few minutes into their dive, Stephen signaled to Todd that they needed to return to the surface. On the surface, they were able to talk about the fact that he had a leak, that it was likely fixable, and he just ended up tightening up his regulator hoses. And they decided that the amount of air that they should have in their tanks was just within safety margins, and decided to dive back down on partial tanks. Now, the issue was that their plan originally was always to go to the bottom with the cave. That's what the cave is for. I don't think that's really possible on one tank. It can be, but it's slightly unsafe if you're not doing all of the compression stops. A lot of divers will kind of play willy-nilly with the limits, just because there have been people who have weird genetic mutations and they can survive nitrogen narcosis down to like 300 feet. There's been reports 300-400 feet of people on normal air being able to do that. But the majority of people actually experience problems at 100 feet. And not only that, a lot of people are taught that they can go up to 120, 130, which a lot of people have died at that depth. It really depends on the body chemistry of the person. Partial pressures have to do with the compression on your body and your lungs, and because your lungs are compressed and also the gas in the tank becomes extremely compressed, you end up breathing in way more oxygen and nitrogen that are in the tank than you normally would on the surface. So breathing in too much nitrogen leads to the bends. It's when the nitrogen bubbles get stuck in your limbs and many other places because they don't absorb properly back. You don't give it enough time to readjust. So the other issue that a lot of divers know about, but they don't really think about the reason. I didn't really think about the reason. I've always heard of hyperventilation being very dangerous as a diver. And the reason behind that is hypocapnia or hypocarbia. Now, it normally comes from hyperventilation, and then when you hyperventilate, it starts your body on this weird loop, and you can't breathe properly, which makes your body panic even more chemically, not just psychologically. Even if you try to calm yourself down, hyperventilation can cause a chemical snowball effect where you end up hyperventilating worse and worse and worse and worse. So many divers know about hyperventilation, as it causes that, and then you pass out down there. But what a lot of divers don't know about is that any kind of improper ventilation can cause hypocarbia. So if you do not breathe in deep enough, if you take too shallow a breaths, too slow and deep a breaths, really anything that almost would make you lightheaded on the surface, any weird breathing you can't do down there. It's going to adjust how you absorb chemicals. So I believe that Mr. Gambrell was already suffering from hypocapnia when they returned to the surface. Because I can tell you, what I experienced with snooping, if I was under the water, I would have definitely had some of it. I would have for sure. The other issue that I think these gentlemen experienced was that they got older. They were used to diving for many, many years. And as you age, think about it like in terms of alcohol. Because when you dive and you breathe in these high concentration of chemicals, your body almost treats it like when we take drugs or drink alcohol. You get an effect. But it's a negative effect because you can get poisoned very fast. So, I think he already had hypocapnia just based off of the slow breathing that I had to do when I was snooping. It would be the same sort of thing to not bring in more water. If you're already choking on water with a rebreather, if you're already choking on water with a regulator, you pretty much have to not drink water. So he likely had hypocapnia, and they did not wait on the surface long enough. In addition, hypocapnia will exacerbate, well, it doesn't really exacerbate or work in tandem with, but they both will poison you. It's like doing two different drugs. It's like drinking and doing pain pills. It's going to be real bad and real hard on your body. I believe he was accidentally suffering from hypocapnia, and they went just on the limits of surface time, being around 5 to 7 minutes for any one of the times that I calculated. It was somewhere in between there. Max, if they waited 10 minutes, there probably would have been no issue, but they would not have been able to go all the way down. The other problem is he was found at 130 feet, which really, when you look at the dive tables, it's not safe to do on a half tank because you have to do a decompression stop because of the fact that they already did a dive before. If they did not want to do a decompression stop, they would only have been down for 8 minutes at the 120-foot mark to not have any stops. So it's doable, but it's dangerous. They basically were going to go down there for a few minutes and come back up. But deciding the dive was within their limits, Stephen and Todd descend back down into the cave. And during this time, sometime, Stephen starts to experience nitrogen narcosis and hypocapnia. He's much more at risk due to his age, weight, as well as the fact that he already had possible hypocapnia compound the effects. Suffering from extreme nitrogen narcosis and hypocapnia, he passed out and started to drown. Todd, panicking, starts to hyperventilate while trying to save his friend. He then realizes that the hyperventilation is going to cause him to black out too, so he makes a break for the exit. Just as he's starting to pass out, he inflates his BC to ensure that he gets to the surface, hoping that the kids would see him and save him. They did not.